The rental car's engine ticks softly as I sit in the driveway, staring at the Whitaker estate through the windshield. 10 years. 10 years since I walked away from this sprawling monument to my family's success, and it still looks exactly the same. Imposing stone columns, perfectly manicured lawns, and windows that catch the afternoon light like watchful eyes. The only difference is me. I'm 39 now, grayer around the temples, carrying the quiet contentment of a life spent among books instead of boardrooms. I step out into the crisp North Carolina air, breathing in the familiar scent of pine and distant woodsmoke that defines Boone in late autumn. My simple black suit feels inadequate against the grandeur before me, but that's always been the point. I chose this life deliberately. Modest, meaningful, mine. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The front door opens before I can knock. My mother, Maggie, stands in the doorway looking older than her 72 years, her silver hair pulled back in the same elegant chignon she's worn since I was a child. Her eyes search my face with something between relief and regret. "Evan," she says softly, "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I'm here for Grandpa Thomas," I reply, stepping into the marble foyer that once felt like a cathedral to my young eyes. Now it just feels cold. She nods, understanding. We've never been good at saying what we mean in this family, but some truths don't need words. Thomas Whitaker was the only one who never made me feel like I was failing by being myself. "Carter's in the study," she says, her voice carefully neutral. "He's excited about today." I follow her through hallways lined with portraits of stern-faced Whitaker ancestors, their painted eyes following me like ghosts of expectations I could never meet. The study doors are heavy oak, and behind them I hear my older brother's voice, confident, commanding, exactly as I remember. Carter turns as I enter, and for a moment I see surprise flicker across his features before the familiar smirk settles into place. He's 41 now. His blonde hair perfectly styled, his tailored suit probably worth more than I make in 3 months. Success sits on him like a second skin. "Well, well," he says, not bothering to stand from behind our grandfather's massive desk. "The prodigal librarian returns. I was starting to think you'd found some dusty corner to hide in permanently." "Hello, Carter," I say evenly. 10 years of distance have taught me the value of not rising to his bait. Frank Daly, the family lawyer, clears his throat from the corner where he's been arranging papers. He's a thin man with kind eyes who's been handling Whitaker business for as long as I can remember. "Shall we begin?" he asks gently. I take a seat across from Carter, my mother settling beside me like a neutral observer at a chess match. Frank opens the will with practiced formality, his voice steady as he reads through the legal language that will reshape our lives. Carter inherits it all: the real estate empire, the construction company, the investment portfolio worth tens of millions of dollars. He nods at each bequest like he's checking items off a grocery list, his satisfaction evident in the way he leans back in the leather chair. Then Frank pauses, looking at me with something almost like sympathy. He reads, "To my grandson Evan Whitaker, who alone among my descendants chose knowledge over wealth, I leave my personal library and the wooden crate in my study closet. May these books serve you as they have served me, as guardians of truth." Carter snorts. Books, of course. How perfectly fitting. But something in Frank's expression stops me from dismissing the bequest entirely. He hands me an old brass key and points to a corner of the study where a simple wooden crate sits on a small table as if waiting. The crate is heavier than expected, filled with maybe 24 volumes, some leather-bound classics, others modern paperbacks, all well-worn with age and handling. It smells like my grandfather's cabin in the mountains, like old paper and pipe tobacco and quiet afternoons. "Is that it?" Carter asks, already standing. "Can I get back to actual business now?" Frank nods, gathering his papers. The estate transfer will be complete within the week. As the others file out, I remain seated, running my fingers along the crate's worn edges. My grandfather's final message to me, wrapped in the language I knew I'd understand. Books. Always books, with Thomas Whitaker. I carry the crate to my rental car, feeling strangely lighter than when I arrived. Carter has what he always wanted: the power, the money, the Whitaker name in all its commercial glory. But as I drive toward the small motel where I'm staying, I find myself wondering what secrets might be hidden in these pages, what truths my grandfather thought worth preserving in wood and leather and whispered words.
The books sit beside me on the passenger seat, patient as old friends, waiting for me to discover why a man who built an empire chose to trust his real legacy to the grandson who walked away from it all. Back in my motel room, I spread the books across the faded floral bedspread like artifacts from an archaeological dig. Most are what I'd expect from Thomas. Thoreau's Walden, a dog-eared copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, several volumes of Robert Frost. Books that spoke to his quiet side, the part of him that built the mountain cabin where we used to sit and talk about everything except the family business. But one catches my attention, a leather-bound edition of Plato's The Republic, its spine cracked from years of handling. I remember this book from his study. He'd quote from it sometimes, usually about justice and truth, concepts that seemed at odds with the ruthless efficiency of Whitaker Enterprises. As I open it, something falls onto the bed, a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. My pulse quickens as I unfold it carefully. It's a hand-drawn map of the Appalachian Mountains surrounding Boone, marked with symbols I don't recognize. At the bottom, in my grandfather's careful script, "Seek the silence that speaks the truth." Beneath the map is another paper, covered in what looks like a cipher. Letters and numbers arranged in careful rows, meaningless to me, but clearly deliberate. My hands shake slightly as I study it. This isn't random. Thomas wanted me to find this. I reach for my phone and dial Sarah Kim, my closest friend from college, who now works as an investigative journalist in Charlotte. If anyone can help me decode this mystery, it's her. "Evan?" Her voice is surprised but warm. "Please tell me you're not calling from some remote mountain cabin." "Close. I'm in Boone." I take a breath. "Sarah, I think my grandfather left me more than just books. I think he left me a puzzle." Sarah arrives the next morning with coffee and the kind of focused energy that made her one of the best investigative reporters in the state. Her dark hair is pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she's armed with a notebook, camera, and the skeptical curiosity that's broken more than one political scandal. "Show me what you found," she says, settling into the motel room's single chair as I spread the map and cipher on the small table between us. She studies them for several minutes, her fingers tracing the mountain symbols. "This looks like it corresponds to actual topography. See these markers? They're too precise to be random." She looks up at me. "Where would your grandfather have kept his research materials?" "The family library," I say without hesitation. "Third floor of the estate. It was his sanctuary." "Can we get in?" "I consider this. The house will be largely empty during the day. Carter's at the office, Mother's probably at her garden club. We can try." An hour later, we're standing outside the estate's service entrance. The key my mother gave me years ago, forgotten in my wallet, still works. We slip inside like thieves in our own family home. The library occupies the entire third floor, its walls lined floor to ceiling with thousands of volumes. Dust motes dance in the afternoon light streaming through tall windows. This was where Thomas and I spent countless hours when I was young, where he taught me that books weren't just stories, but doorways to understanding. "My God," Sarah whispers, pulling out her camera. "This is incredible." I move to the section I remember best, philosophy and history. My fingers find familiar spines, books Thomas would read aloud from during our afternoons together. But now I'm looking for something different, something hidden. In Aristotle's Ethics, I find the first annotation, faint pencil markings in the margins, circling passages about moral courage. The word silence is underlined 3 times. Sarah, look at this. She photographs the page as I continue searching. In Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, more marginalia. In Emerson's Essays, tiny symbols that match the cipher from the map. Then I find it. A locked drawer built into the base of the philosophy section, so seamlessly integrated I would have missed it if I hadn't been looking. The same key that opened the crate fits perfectly. Inside, a leather portfolio containing photocopied documents, more hand-drawn maps, and a cassette tape labeled in Thomas's handwriting, "For Evan, the weight of truth." "We need to hear this," Sarah says, her journalist instincts fully engaged. But as we prepare to leave, I hear the unmistakable sound of a car door slamming in the driveway below. Through the window, I see Carter's Mercedes. We need to go, now. We move quickly but quietly, Sarah stuffing the portfolio into her messenger bag while I pocket the cassette tape. The sound of Carter's footsteps echoes through the marble foyer below, accompanied by another voice I don't recognize, probably Frank Daly. "The old construction yard," I whisper, remembering another location from the map. "There's a storage shed there that Thomas used as an office in the early days."
We slipped down the back stairs and out through the kitchen entrance, my heart hammering against my ribs. This feels absurd. 2 adults sneaking around like teenagers? But something in my grandfather's careful arrangements tells me secrecy matters here. Telling and preparing the story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The abandoned Whitaker construction yard sits on the outskirts of Boone, a graveyard of rusted equipment and weathered buildings that haven't been used since the company moved to more modern facilities 5 years ago. The storage shed stands apart from the main structures, its blue paint peeling but its foundations still solid. The lock is old but functional. Sarah produces a small toolkit from her bag, journalist preparedness, she explains with a grin, and works at it while I keep watch. The door swings open with a protesting creak. Inside, beneath a tarp-covered desk, we find what Thomas intended us to find. The desk's bottom drawer contains a hidden compartment, and within it, architectural blueprints, legal documents, and a small metal box locked with a combination I don't know. But it's what Sarah discovers in the desk's main drawer that makes my blood run cold. A cassette recorder, old but well-maintained, with a tape already loaded. The label reads, July 1985. In Thomas's handwriting. "Should we listen here?" Sarah asks, but I shake my head. Too exposed, too risky. As if summoned by my paranoia, I hear the distant sound of an engine. Through the shed's grimy window, I watch Carter's Mercedes pull into the yard, followed by a second car I don't recognize. How did he know? I breathe. Sarah is already moving, gathering everything we've found. She explains that family tracking each other isn't uncommon among the wealthy, especially when there's inheritance involved. We slip out the back of the shed just as car doors slam in the front. I catch a glimpse of Carter's face through the chain-link fence as we hurry towards Sarah's car. Suspicious, angry, searching. For the first time since returning to Boone, I see something in my brother's expression that genuinely frightens me. Back at the motel, Sarah spreads our discoveries across both beds while I stare at the cassette tape. "Whatever's on here," I say. Thomas thought it was important enough to hide from his own family. "Only one way to find out," Sarah replies, setting up the recorder. The ancient cassette player speakers crackle to life, filling the motel room with the ghost of my grandfather's voice from nearly 40 years ago. But he's not alone. "I can't sleep, Franklin," Thomas says, his voice younger but already carrying the weight I remember from my childhood. Every time I close my eyes, I see their faces, the Henderson family, the Patels, old Mrs. Chen with her herb garden. Franklin Daly's voice responds, clearer and more confident than the elderly lawyer I know today. Thomas, we've been over this. The Riverside development was legally sound. Every permit, every environmental study. Legal and right aren't the same thing. Thomas's chair creaks, and I can picture him in that old office, probably staring out at the mountains. 43 families, Franklin. 43 families who'd lived there for generations, and we swept them away with a legal technicality. Sarah leans forward, her notebook already filling with shorthand. This isn't just family history. This is a confession. The zoning variance was legitimate. The city needed the tax revenue. The city council needed the donations we provided for their campaigns. Thomas interrupts bitterly. Don't dress it up in civic duty. We wanted that land because it was cheap and close to the interstate. We knew those families couldn't afford to fight us in court. There's a long pause, filled only with the tape's static. When Thomas speaks again, his voice is barely above a whisper. I drove through there yesterday. Where Mrs. Chen's garden used to be, there's a parking lot. Where the Henderson kids played in the creek, there's a storm drain. We didn't just take their homes, Franklin, we erased them. You're being dramatic. Development is progress. You've built an empire. I've built a monument to my own greed. And the worst part is, no one will ever know. The newspapers ran our press releases about urban renewal and economic development. The displaced families scattered to other towns, other states. Their stories died with their displacement.
The tape continues, but I'm no longer hearing words. I'm hearing the grandfather I thought I knew. The man who taught me about justice and integrity, admitting to destroying lives for profit. Sarah's hand finds my shoulder as the recording reveals more details, payoffs to city officials, suppressed environmental reports, intimidation tactics against families who initially refused to sell. When Thomas's voice finally says, "One day I pray someone will be brave enough to tell the truth," someone with nothing to lose and everything to gain from honesty, I understand why he left me the books. He left me this burden, this choice, this chance at redemption he never gave himself. The tape ends in silence, leaving us alone with the weight of 40-year-old sins. The next morning, I sit across from my mother in her sunlit breakfast nook, pretending to sip coffee while my stomach churns with questions I'm not sure I want answered. Maggie moves around her kitchen with the practiced efficiency of someone who spent decades avoiding difficult conversations, but I can see the tension in her shoulders. "I've been thinking about the old days," I begin carefully, "about Grandpa Thomas and the early years of the company." Her hand pauses mid-pour as she refills her coffee cup. "That was a long time ago, Evan. I found some of his old records from 1985, the Riverside development." The coffee cup slips from her fingers, shattering against the marble floor in a spray of ceramic and dark liquid. For a moment, we both stare at the mess. And in that silence, I have my answer. "You knew," I say quietly. She kneels to gather the broken pieces, her movements careful and deliberate. "Your grandfather carried many burdens, Evan. That's not unusual for men in his position. 43 families, Mother, displaced, silenced. Her hand still among the ceramic shards. You don't understand the complexities. Then explain them to me." I lean forward, and for the first time in years, I hear real emotion in my own voice. "Help me understand how the man who taught me about justice and integrity could destroy an entire community." Maggie stands slowly, disposing of the broken cup with methodical precision. "Your grandfather wasn't perfect, Evan, but he wasn't evil either. The Riverside situation, it broke something in him.
changed him, not enough to make it right. He tried, her voice is barely audible. For years after, he tried to find the families, to help them, but most had scattered too far, and those he did find, they didn't want his money. They wanted their homes back, their community back, things he couldn't give them. I think of the cipher, the careful arrangements, the books filled with annotations about moral courage. So he decided to leave the truth to me. My mother's eyes meet mine for the first time since I mentioned 1985. He believed you were the only one strong enough to carry it, the only one who wouldn't be corrupted by protecting the family name. That evening, as I'm leaving the estate, she intercepts me at the front door. Without a word, she presses a small brass key into my palm. Her fingers are cold, trembling slightly. Bank of North Carolina, Blowing Rock Branch, safety deposit box registered under the name Thomas Mitchell. I stare at the key, understanding flooding through me. How long have you known about this? Since the day he died, she says, stepping back into the shadows of the foyer. I've been waiting for you to be ready to find it. The Bank of North Carolina in Blowing Rock is a modest brick building that seems almost quaint compared to the corporate towers where the Whitaker fortune now lives. Sarah waits in the car while I approach the safety deposit box vault, my grandfather's pseudonymous key feeling heavy as a stone in my pocket. The box is larger than I expected, containing a thick leather-bound journal and a manila envelope marked "For Evan's Eyes Only" in Thomas's careful script. My hands shake as I carry everything to the small viewing room the bank provides. The journal spans decades, beginning in 1980 when Thomas was building his empire. The early entries read like a businessman's diary: land acquisitions, zoning meetings, profit margins. But gradually, a different voice emerges, a voice heavy with growing awareness of the human cost of his success. March 15, 1985. Met with the Henderson family today. 3 generations living in that little house by the creek. The grandmother showed me photos of her late husband building the place with his own hands in 1952. I smiled and nodded and offered them twice what the house is worth, knowing it's a tenth of what the land will make us. April 2, 1985. City Council approved the variance unanimously. Franklin says it's because our proposal benefits the whole community. I know it's because of the campaign contributions. Same result, I suppose, but the taste in my mouth is different. July 10, 1985. The last family moved out today. Mrs. Chen left her herb garden intact, as if she hoped someone would tend it. I walked through it after the bulldozers left. Nothing grows in parking lots.
Page after page, year after year, the entries document not just what happened, but Thomas's evolving understanding of what he had become. He tried to find the displaced families, as my mother said. He established scholarships for their children. He donated anonymously to housing nonprofits. But the journal makes clear these gestures felt hollow to him, band-aids on a wound that required surgery. December 31st, 1999. Carter asked me today why I never seem proud of what we've built. How do I tell my son that every dollar we've earned carries the ghost of someone else's loss? How do I explain that success and righteousness aren't always the same thing? The final entry is dated just 3 months before his death. Evan called today from his library in North Carolina. He told me about a book program he's starting for underprivileged children, how reading can open doors that poverty closes. Listening to him, I remembered why I once believed business could be a force for good. He has something I lost somewhere along the way, the courage to choose principle over profit. If anyone can set this right, it will be him. The truth is patient. It has waited 40 years. It can wait until he's ready to carry it. The envelope contains a single letter, dated the day before he died. The letter is brief, written in Thomas's increasingly shaky handwriting. My dear Evan, if you're reading this, then you followed the breadcrumbs I left and discovered what I could never find the courage to reveal myself. The Riverside families deserve justice, even 40 years late. I've enclosed documentation that proves our culpability. The real environmental reports we suppressed, records of payments to city officials, communications showing we knew families would be unable to fight the displacement. I know this burden is unfair. You chose a life away from our business precisely to avoid these moral compromises, but you're the only one I trust to do what is right, regardless of the cost to our name. The choice is yours. The evidence speaks for itself. I love you, and I'm sorry. Grandfather Thomas. I'm still staring at the letter when I return to the motel that evening, my mind churning with the weight of decision. Sarah has been researching all day, cross-referencing the displaced families with public records, finding confirmation of Thomas's accounts. Some of them are still alive, she says quietly. The Henderson children are in their 60s now, scattered across 3 states. Mrs. Chen's son runs a restaurant in Asheville. They deserve to know the truth was finally acknowledged. A sharp knock interrupts our conversation. Through the peephole, I see Carter's face, hard with anger and determination. Open the door, Evan. We need to talk. I glance at Sarah, who nods grimly and begins securing the journal and documents. Whatever Carter wants, it won't be pleasant. He pushes past me the moment the door opens, his usual composed facade cracked by barely controlled fury. What the hell do you think you're doing? I could ask you the same thing. How did you find me? I've been watching you since the will reading. You think I didn't notice you skulking around the estate, the construction yard? He spots the scattered papers on the bed. Jesus Christ, Evan, you actually found it? Found what, Carter? The truth about what this family built its fortune on? His laugh is bitter, harsh. The truth? You want to talk about truth? Here's a truth for you. That community you're so concerned about was a collection of squatters and illegal immigrants living in substandard housing without proper sewage or electrical systems. We didn't destroy a neighborhood. We cleaned up a health hazard. That's not what Grandpa's journal says. Carter's face goes white. You have his journal? I have everything. The real environmental reports, the records of bribes, the communications showing you all knew exactly what you were doing. For a long moment, we stare at each other across the small room. Then Carter's expression shifts, becoming calculating, dangerous. Here's what's going to happen, he says slowly. You're going to forget everything you think you've discovered. You're going to take your little inheritance and go back to your books and your quiet life, and you're never going to speak of this again. Or, his smile is cold as winter, or I'll destroy you, and I have the resources to do it.
The story breaks on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after Carter's ultimatum. Sarah's editor at the Charlotte Observer runs it as a front-page exposé. Mountain Empire built on buried truth. Documents reveal decades-old displacement cover-up. I read it over coffee in my small apartment back home, my hands steady for the first time since this all began. Sarah has done masterful work, presenting the evidence with surgical precision while protecting the identities of living family members who might not want the attention. The article focuses on the systematic corruption, the suppressed environmental studies, and most damning of all, Thomas's own recorded confession from 1985. By noon, my phone has rung 17 times. Reporters, lawyers, people claiming to be descendants of displaced families. I answer none of them, but I do read every text message from Carter, watching his tone evolve from fury to desperation to something approaching acceptance. You've destroyed everything we built. The lawsuits start tomorrow. I hope your conscience was worth it. Mother won't come out of her room. That last message cuts deeper than his anger. I drive to Boone that afternoon to check on Maggie, finding her in the garden behind the estate, methodically deadheading roses as if normalcy could be cultivated through routine. I saw the newspaper,
she says without looking up from her work. "I'm sorry. I know this isn't what you wanted." She pauses, her pruning shears hovering over a wilted bloom. What I wanted stopped mattering 40 years ago, when I chose silence over speaking up. Your grandfather tried to tell me what was happening with Riverside, and I told him business wasn't my concern. You were protecting your family. I was protecting my comfort. She cuts the dead rose with unnecessary force. The families your grandfather displaced had mothers too, Evan. Mothers who lost their homes because I was too comfortable to ask difficult questions. Franklin Daly resigns from the law firm that afternoon, citing irreconcilable differences with recent revelations. Carter holds a press conference, calling the accusations ancient history and promising the company will move forward with renewed commitment to ethical development. But the damage is visible in his hollow eyes, in the way his voice wavers when he claims the displaced families were fairly compensated. The Whitaker company's stock price drops 30% in 2 days. 3 class action lawsuits are filed by the end of the week. A documentary filmmaker contacts Sarah about adaptation rights. Most importantly, James Henderson calls me from Phoenix, where he's lived for 38 years since his family was forced from their Riverside home. His voice is careful, measured, but I can hear decades of buried grief in his questions. "Is it true?" he asks. "The recordings, the documents your grandfather left, is it finally true?" "Yes," I tell him. "It's true. For the first time since I opened that wooden crate, I sleep peacefully." 6 months later, I stand in the ruins of what was once Mrs. Chen's herb garden, now a cracked parking lot behind a strip mall. The asphalt is beginning to buckle, and weeds push through the fissures with quiet determination. Nature, it seems, has a longer memory than corporations. The legal settlements are still being negotiated, but some things can't wait for lawyers. With what remains of my grandfather's inheritance after the lawsuits, I've established the Riverside Community Foundation, a modest trust dedicated to affordable housing and community development in areas where families have been displaced by unchecked growth. James Henderson drove down from Phoenix for the foundation's first meeting. At 73, he carries his family's story with the dignity of someone who has learned that survival itself is a form of victory. We stood together in this parking lot, 2 strangers connected by a 40-year-old wound, and he told me about the creek that used to run where we were standing. My sister caught fireflies here every summer. She died 3 years ago, never knowing anyone would finally acknowledge what was taken from us. Carter hasn't spoken to me since the story broke. The Whitaker company survived, restructured and renamed, but he resigned from the board last month. Maggie tells me he's moved to Charleston, started teaching high school business classes. I hope he finds whatever peace looks like for him. My mother has surprised everyone, perhaps most of all herself. She's become an advocate for elderly residents facing displacement, using her considerable social connections to pressure developers into more ethical practices. "Better late than never," she told me last week, though I know it's mostly too late. Sarah's book about the Riverside story will be published next year. She's calling it The Last Book, a reference to how this all began, with a wooden crate full of volumes that seemed worthless until they revealed their true worth. She's dedicating it to the families who never forgot, and the grandfather who finally remembered.
I've returned to my quiet life among books, but it feels different now. Every story I catalog, every patron I help, carries the weight of understanding that truth and silence are choices we make every day. The teenage boy who comes in to research his family history, the elderly woman seeking information about her old neighborhood, they all deserve someone willing to dig deeper than the comfortable surface. This morning, I found a package on my doorstep. Inside, a small potted plant labeled Chinese 5-spice and a note from James Henderson. Mrs. Chen's grandson sent this from her original garden. He saved seeds all these years. I planted in my backyard, a small act of restoration in a world that needs so many. Somewhere, I like to think, my grandfather finally rests easy, knowing the silence has finally learned to speak.